Okay, we're going to do some work on functions. Functions, to get going, involve a lot of substitution work. So let's get straight into an example. Let's say f of x equals 3x, g of x equals x plus 1. Let's say I was looking for g of f of 5. Okay, so let's first of all find f of 5. Okay, the f function tells me that whatever's in the bracket are rated down in a treblet. So whatever's in the bracket are rated down in treblet. So whatever's in the bracket are rated down in treblet. That's 3 5s are 15. Okay, so f of 5 is equal to 15. So g of f of 5 would be g of 15. Let's have a look at the g function. G function tells me whatever's in the bracket are rated down in an add-on 1. Whatever's in the bracket are rated down in add-on 1. So whatever's in the bracket are rated down add-on 1. So g 15 is equal to 16. Okay, let's break this one up into a few parts and try part B. Part B, let's go for find f of g of x. Well, that's f of, well, g of x, as we can see, is equal to x plus 1. So that is f of x plus 1. The f function tells me whatever's in the bracket, write it down and treble it. So whatever is in the bracket, write it down and treble it. So that will be 3x plus 3. Let's try equation C, g of f of x. Well, that's g of, well, f of x is equal to 3x. That's a straight substitution. The g function is whatever's in the bracket, write it down and add on 1. Whatever's in the bracket, write it down and add on 1. Final answer. Okay, let's try an example 2, which says that f of x equals x squared minus 2 and g of x equals 1 over x. And the question's first of all asking for f of g of x, so that's f of, well, g of x equals 1 over x, that's f of 1 over x. The f function tells me whatever's in the bracket, write it down, square it and take away 2. Whatever's in the bracket, write it down, square it and take away 2. Whatever is in the bracket, write it down, square it and take away 2. So we'll square top and bottom there, so that's 1 over x squared minus 2. Let's now try g of f of x. Okay, so g of f of x will be g of, well, f of x equals x squared minus 2, so that's g of x squared minus 2. The g function is whatever's in the bracket is on the bottom of a fraction with 1 up top, so on the denominator of a fraction with 1 up top. Okay, so for each of the following questions, we're going to find h of x, which is g of f of x, and we're going to find k of x, which is f of g of x. So first of all, let's find h of x for the following. When f of x equals x plus 1 and g of x equals 3x. Okay, so h of x is g of f of x, that's g of x plus 1. Since f of x is x plus 1. The g function is whatever's in the bracket, write it down, treble it. So whatever's in the bracket, write it down and treble it, and that's 3x plus 3. Okay, so let's find the f of g of x. That's f of, well, g of x equals 3x. The f function is whatever's in the bracket, write it down, add on 1. Whatever's in the bracket, write it down and add on 1. Okay, next one, f of x equals 2x plus 1 and g of x equals 4x. So g of f of x is g of 2x plus 1. The g function is whatever's in the bracket, write it down and multiply by 4. Whatever's in the bracket, write it down and multiply by 4, so that would be ax plus 4. For f of g of x, then that would be f of, well, g of x is equal to 4x. So that's f of 4x. The f function is whatever's in the bracket, write it down, double it and add on 1. Whatever's in the bracket, write it down, double it and add on 1. So that would be ax plus 1. Okay, our next one will be f of x equals x minus 2 and g of x equals x squared. So g of f of x is g of x minus 2. The g function is whatever's in the bracket, write it down and square it. Whatever is in the bracket, write it down and square it. I could open that up and that would be x squared minus 4x plus 4. Okay, so for f of g of x then, that would be f of x squared, since g of x is equal to x squared. The f function tells me whatever's in the bracket, I write it down and I take away 2. Whatever's in the bracket, I write it down and take away 2. Okay, let's try another couple. So, f of x equals 4x and g of x equals sin x. Okay, so g of f of x, g of 4x. Okay, so the g function is, it's the sine of whatever's inside the bracket, so it's the sine of 4x. For f of g of x is f of, well, g of x is sine x, and the f function is whatever's in the bracket, you write it down and you multiply before, so whatever's in the bracket, you write it down and you multiply before for sine x. Okay, let's say f of x equals 2 to the power x, and g of x is equal to x minus 5. So g of f of x, g of 2 to the power x. The g function is whatever's in the bracket, you write it down, take away 5. Whatever's in the bracket, you write it down and you take away 5. Okay, for f of g of x, that's f of x minus 5. Okay, so the f function is whatever's in the bracket, it's 2 to the power whatever is in the bracket, so it's 2 to the power whatever's inside the bracket, 2 to the power x minus 5.